Hello and welcome to Manna Church's Small Group Leader Equip. My name is Jacob Lindsay. I'm on staff here and I'm so excited to welcome you today. We do this event twice a year and it's an amazing opportunity for small group leaders and members of our church to gather together and really just get on the same page. As you may know, if you've been attending here at Manna Church or watching online for a while, our pastor Jeff actually went on a 6-week-long sabbatical, and the Lord really spoke to him on what it means to be a community, what it means to be the church. So today, in our first session, we're really talking about what it means to be spiritual family, and ultimately, what it means to be the body of Christ. Before we get started today, I want to encourage you to maybe pull your family in and watch this video together, maybe share this link with others so that we can do this thing together. We don't want to do life alone. And I think the most exciting thing about these sessions is that we have some questions for discussion. So if you decide to watch this Leader Equip with friends or with family, we encourage you to check out the questions at the end of the first session and really talk through exactly what we're talking about today on spiritual family. So strap in, get ready, because Manna Church's 2021 Small Group Leader Equip starts right now.
First of all, thank you all for being here. I know it's a Saturday afternoon. You've sacrificed your time off with your family and maybe date night with your spouse or just out with friends. We are recording this, so those of you who are joining us later on at another time, what we're going to be talking about is very important, and it's going to be a base, it's going to be a foundation for really everything that has happened in Manna Church so far. So really, I want this to be more of a dialogue rather than information and you taking notes. I have given you some notes just to follow along with this, but as I prayed, this really is about us being joined together as the church. So as I go on, we'll be talking about the church a little bit. And when I say the church, I don't want us to be thinking about the organization of Manna Church High Point. I'm asking you to think in terms of when I got born again, God made me his church. And so today, in this context, when we're talking about church, it is a little bit of both, but mainly it's about being part of God's church worldwide, which means we have family all over the world that we have never met. But one day we will, and maybe we'll all get to know each other. So I want to share some core beliefs that really were instilled in Anna and I as Christian when we became Christians. For me, that was 38 years ago. And for Anna, that was 40 years ago. And when we got saved, these things, what I'm going to talk about today, were put inside of us. And it was really the foundation of where we went from. I think this is the secret sauce to the church, what I'm about to share. And when I make this spaghetti sauce, and it's very labor intensive, but what you never do, and so the secret sauce for the church is labor intensive, and you never just take the ingredients and just throw all the ingredients at once. You put a little bit in and you layer it, and it takes time to build the flavor. And so it's been 3 years in as Manna, and we're layering the ingredients, and now this is going to be the greatest flavor. And so really what I'm talking about today is about culture, about the culture we want. And I will be referencing Michael Fletcher's book a little bit, but culture is about what when people walk in this room, what they feel. And it's what you and I feel when we're together. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about. So these two things were really put deeply inside of us, and it'll set up for what I want to talk about. I'm wanting this to be in us. I want everyone that walks into our small group to experience this. I want all of us to really experience this. And what I'm talking about is there's a price that goes along with it. But I believe these two things very, 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 very deeply, and they've been inside of us. I believe that Jesus is building his church, his ecclesia. That was a common word at the time Jesus walked on the earth. And he said, and that's what the Greeks and the Romans used. They had ecclesia. They were called out to take care of public affairs. And Jesus said, they have their ecclesia, but I have mine, and I will build mine, not theirs. And so Jesus said, so the church belongs to Jesus. It's his. He isn't building our church, and we are not building his church, but he is building his church. It's his, and he's building it. Secondly, God has always had a plan to have a people for himself. That's really, really important, because Western Christianity, especially in America, in the South, we tend to think that the church is something that you join. But when you become a believer, you become his people. We become his people. That means we've been separated out, we're designated, and now we really, really, truly belong to God. And that, it doesn't supersede blood family, but it certainly adds to it and is a little bit different. But it's a unique thing. And because of these two things, I have always had this. I'm going to give you a little bit of personal testimony. I've always had this incredible sense of destiny in me. I don't really know exactly where it came from. When I was younger, before I was a teenager, before I was age 12, my mom went to the Mormon church, and my brother and I both actually were baptized into the Mormon church. But by the time I was 12, we stopped going. And I don't know how this got inside of me. It was, that's a cult, by the way. And but going there, I had no idea. But there was a sense of God that just came upon my life, and I don't know how I got it, but I believe that God was real at a very young age. I believe that God created everything. When I got to college, I started looking at evolution. I got seriously confused because they told me man evolved, and I was sitting there going, I thought God created everybody. I was seriously confused before I got saved. And then thirdly, well, you might think I'm still confused, but anyway, God created things with a purpose. I believe there's a God. He created everything, and he created with purpose. And I don't really know where that came from, but I knew the only way that I would tap into that destiny was if I was attached to God somehow. So all my life, I just knew there was a sense of destiny, and I had to somehow, if I was going to tap into that. When I was 12 years old, I was at my friend Ashley's house. I remember this very distinctly, standing in his hallway, and I began to think, what is my life going to be like when I'm grown? And in that moment, I still remember something came on me, and I realized that my future was secure and that something greater was directing my life. I remember having that feeling. And I was only like 10 or 12 years old. Later on, I was always thinking about God and that God was directing my life. I was in my yard, I was mowing the lawn, and I had this St. Christopher someone had given me. I lost it, and I really wanted that thing. And we're not religious, partying a lot. I just asked God, if you'll, it was a dumb prayer, but God held me accountable to it. I said, if you'll just help me find this St. Christopher in the yard, I'll serve you. Never pray that if you're not serious, but God takes it serious. Anyway, I found it within like 3 minutes. It was an acre yard. I found that thing. That sense of God was on me. And I remember working at my aunt and uncle's restaurant, washing dishes, and I always had this thought, why was I born now? Why not 100 years ago? Or why not 100 years from now? I'm just trying to communicate to you that apart from being religious on any level, God creates everything with a purpose and has a destiny. And as I've told you before, I was sitting with my friends, my best friend growing up, his name was Randy Bass. And every time we get high, I just turn to him, we're just smoking, I'd turn to him and go, man, if we don't stop smoking marijuana, we're all going to go straight to hell. And he would go, shut up, man, shut up. I don't want to talk about that. And I would just go, fine. I'd just keep smoking away going, man, we're going to have to quit smoking this. We're going to go to hell, And so in 1983, all that sense of destiny, that seed that was planted in me from the Mormon church, I believe, and from my mom maybe, was awakened in February of 1983 by a young evangelist who I heard preach. And I don't really remember exactly what he said in that hour, but whatever that seed was, it lay dormant, but in that moment, it must have grown 1,000 feet on the inside of me, and it awakened this thing inside of me. And I remember in my mind's eye, pointing at this guy, Rice Brooks, in my mind, just going, that's it. That's what I've been waiting for all my life, the gospel. And at that moment, I knew I had discovered my purpose. Not everybody gets to say that, but I discovered my purpose, and I never turned back. And my parents questioned it, thought I joined a cult. But at that moment, I knew that I discovered my purpose, but something else had happened that I wasn't aware of yet. And this is the point. I found my people. And that's a real powerful thing. I discovered my purpose, and I found my people. This was really funny. Last year when we were building the shelter, before we started construction, we were laying concrete, and this Mexican family was pouring the concrete, and they brought all their family out on this Saturday, and they were having a picnic in our yard, and they were working on our patio. And the guy had his daughter with him, or his granddaughter. I don't remember. How old was she? 4 years old. And I'm standing in the garage, and this little Mexican girl just saw me in my garage. We're standing in the driveway, and she went, "Grandpa, I found you." And she just jerked away from her dad and left his hand and jumped into my arms. And I'm sitting there going, "I'm not a pervert. I don't know. Don't leave me alone," And so I hugged her and I went, "Hey," and she's just smiling and grinning. And she went back to her dad. And about 45 minutes later, I walked back out again, and she had kind of forgotten. And she saw me, and she went, "Grandpa, I found you." And that's how I felt when I was listening to that guy. I had discovered my purpose, but I found my people. And from that moment on, everything changed. That sense of purpose and destiny was put in me by God, and God has so organized my life. And hear this. This is a point. That God has so organized my life, I realized that my destiny was directly tied to a people. And that's something that you don't really hear a lot of, but I believe it's biblical. And I'm going to share, not theologically, but what I think we find in Scripture is a biblical precedent. You know what a precedent is? It's an example that you can reason from. And I think we find this kind of idea. Michael Fletcher said this. After I wrote this down, that my destiny was directly tied to a people. I found this quote in Michael's book, Empowering Leadership. "We are not made to be alone. So who we are as individuals is inextricably tied to other people. Who we are and why we are here can only be discovered in community with others." Let me say that again. Who we are and why we are here can only be discovered in community with others. From that moment, I found my people. I was joined to a group of people. I didn't join a church. In fact, I didn't even realize those folks were a church. It was a group of people who were sold out to do whatever God wanted to do, and whatever God wanted to do with them, all I knew was, I don't really care what God is doing, I just want to do it with them. So I got on a bus, and I didn't really care where the bus was going as long as I was going with those people. And that kind of freaked my parents out. But then later on, they both got saved. And I'll quote my dad here in a few minutes. We were only about 30, 40 people back then, but we had a purpose and a destiny together. And for the next 30 years, I really walked with all the same people that led me to the Lord. I walked with those people for 30 years. And still are. We're still joined when we meet people like that. In fact, I'll tell you a story here in a minute, but when we meet people from our past like that, immediately we have this common past, common language, just this common thing that God had joined us together. It was in that group of people that I found lifelong friendships. I found my wife, the greatest joining that has ever happened, and I'll make a distinction there. But that sense of being joined to people, that sense of purpose and destiny with people, I think that sense of belonging should be found in every single church and community on the planet. I really believe this, and I believe this is the secret sauce, because everyone wants to know this. Everyone wants to know, do I belong, and does my life count? And these are really powerful things, because if we don't really believe that our destiny is inextricably tied to other people, then we will never be, us in this room, we will never believe that we need to be a part of a group of people. It's not necessary to walk with God, nor will we invite anyone into that. And I realize these are fine lines and there's balance, but hear this with balance and health and not control, because religious control is wickedness. It's wickedness. So I'm not talking about any of those kinds of things. But there are certain things when you get in relationship that you get to make demands on people's lives that aren't biblical. Just preferences. I mean, just ask any marriage. Nobody pulls the Bible out on their marriage and go, well, you're the one that should cook and you're the one that should clean. No, these are preferences that you work out, and you get to make these demands because in the context of relationship, and there's certain demands that we get to place on each other's lives. And so anyway, just this week, so Jefferson and Kayla, everyone knows, is moving to Miami. And I have a friend from the past that I was there in the room when he got saved, and I'd forgotten about that, but I called him up, and they're living in Miami. And I haven't talked to him in over 20 years. And as soon as we got on the phone, we made like 2 different sentences and said something, and we both knew exactly what we were talking about without any explanation. We had common language, common bonding. And if you haven't ever had that, boy, it's really the most wonderful thing in the world and the most terrifying thing in the world. It's the most joyful and celebrated thing in the world and the most risky, wounding thing in the world. It's both and I don't think you can actually celebrate relationship without wounding. So we just need to get past this. So I remember at our talking about how God joined us together with people. I remember at our wedding rehearsal dinner, my parents wanted to host it at their house, and my dad, there was probably about 20 or 30 of us there, I can't remember. But he pulled me aside. My dad's not saved at this time. And he pulled me aside and said, and here's what he said. He says, son, you're like the luckiest, richest man in the world. He said, a man is lucky if he finds 2 or 3 relationships in his life like what you have. But you have 20 of them now. And all those people we're still walking with, at least friendship, when we see each other, we've gone through wounding and we've hurt each other, but when we see each other, it's just pure ecstasy and celebration. And so I think God does this. I think he wants to do that. And yeah. So I had a friend once share this, actually the guy that led Anna and I both to Christ. I remember him talking, and he said he felt like God spoke this phrase to him, and I think it's in your notes. And so I'm going to quote him, but again, this isn't in the Bible, but he felt like God put this in his mind. God said to him, if you notice, I, God, have never used anyone of any great significance in the Bible without first being in covenant with them. And if you're wise, you won't either. Let me say that again. God basically felt like he said, if you notice, I've never used anyone of any great significance in the Bible without first being in covenant with them. And if you notice that's what he did. He covenant with Adam, covenant with Noah. He chose it. He initiated it. Covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then with Israel. And then Jesus made a new covenant with us in his blood to us. He makes a covenant, and then he has a people, and then he makes demands on his people. Has God ever made any demands on your life? If you don't feel like God's ever made any demands on your life, well, I'm not saying it here, but basically you probably don't have a relationship with him. So I think we see this precedent again, what I call being joined to people. Not only God joining himself to a people, but people being joined together. And so I used this phrase back when we lived in Krakow a lot, that God joins people to people. God does do that, and I think we have a precedent for this. One, give you a couple examples. The Tower of Babel. Now, I know that most people think Nimrod is this wicked, horrible guy. And in one sense, he is, but he was able to rally every person on the planet around a common vision with common language and build this structure. And he was able to get them to join together in unity. It's really a phenomenal thing. I think he may be one of the greatest leaders that's ever mentioned in the Bible because he was able to pull everyone together. And they made a covenant with one another to such a degree that God didn't despise the covenant. He just said, because they want to be in covenant with one another, apart from being in covenant with me, I have to divide them. Because covenant with one another only works if you're first in covenant with God. Because that's how marriage works. Marriage works that way, that you're in covenant with God, that even when you're right in an argument, sometimes you're still wrong. And so then you go back and you have to come back and you have to still make it right because of this. But if it's just here without God, you're going to get divided. And so only God, the only thing that really holds us together is this common salvation, the blood of Jesus Christ, the Spirit of God in our lives. And that's why we must be dependent upon Him and really hear so that when we have arguments, which we will, and we don't get along, that when we go back, we go, but I'm right. And He goes, you are right about that, but you're wrong in your spirit and your attitude and those kind of things. And we still can come back together and fight through it. And so we were taught to not avoid conflict, but to run through it and try to bring resolve. And that's not everybody's personality. I know many of us in this room, we really hate conflict and try to avoid it at all costs. But that doesn't help. Anyway, just hear that with balance. Second example we have is Ruth. Is everybody here? Yeah. Ruth, it says this in Ruth 1:4, it says, everybody know who Ruth is? I'm not trying to give you if you don't know who Ruth is, if you knew those Bible answers, you better know who Ruth is. Anyway. And it says, Ruth and her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law, it says, and they lifted up their voices and wept together. And Orpah, not Oprah, but Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. The word clung means to be fused. It means to be welded together. And it's the same Hebrew word that was used when God says that man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. So the same kind of fusion, not at the same level, but there's a fusion that happens between people that's less than the covenant of marriage, but it's still this joining together. And interesting thing enough, she said, your people will now be my people. I will leave my natural family. I'll leave my people. And now your people will be my people. And wherever your people are, that's where I'm going to be. Wherever you are, that's where I'm going to be. Again, it's a precedent, not a theological stance. It gives us an example that God does these kinds of things. And I think it's the secret sauce. I think it's the thing that Jesus said, when the world sees the love that we have for one another, they will know that you are my disciples. And so divisiveness is the thing that puts people off. But people who can be in conflict and still walk together, that's a powerful thing, especially where we're joined. And even though we might disagree, we don't get polarized to the place where we separate. David and Jonathan, 1 Samuel 18, it says, now it came about that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Their relationship was so close that Jonathan, who was the heir to the throne, recognized God's purposes on David's life and was willing to adjust his life to make room for David. That's Jonathan had a right to the throne. He surrendered it because of what God had done in their relationship, and he recognized God's hand on their life, and then he made room in his life. He adjusted his entire lifestyle, his entire destiny, to make room for what God was doing. Bottom line is, we are the body of Christ, and our lives are not our own. Jesus, interesting, with Matthew, Mark, I'm going to try to, I don't know how much time I'm at here. Where am I? Not enough time. Jesus, this what he says, this story is recorded, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I'm going to read out of Matthew 12:47. Someone said to Jesus, behold, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak to you. But Jesus answered the one who was telling him and said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Imagine if your parents showed up today as close as they are, and someone said, hey, Kaylee, your mom and dad are out here, and she turns to everybody and go, well, who are my mother and father? And you're like, you don't know? Did you grow up with them? Yes, I know who they are. He says, who are they? And stretching out his hands, then he waved to all the people that were sitting around. He goes, whoever does the will of God, that's my family. I mean, that's a powerful thing if you think about it. And all three Gospels record this moment. In the West, we're so individualistic. I'm getting ahead of myself. I might need to. Jesus elevates spiritual family without replacing his natural family. He didn't say they weren't his family. Jesus puts spiritual family at a minimum on the same level as he does blood family. So it's not to replace it, but to add to it, I think. For some people, though, listen, we know that for so many people, maybe in this room, you don't have natural family to even look to. And there's hundreds and thousands of people, maybe half of society, that really don't have good relationships with their own family, and they have nobody else, and they feel like they're alone, that their lives don't count, and they don't belong anywhere. That's why God gave us spiritual family, and he says he places us in family. And spiritual family has to be elevated to a place that we make room for people. I mean, the Spencers just made room for a 14-year-old boy in their life. They had to make room. He's not even natural family. They had to make room for him. If you don't know that story, talk to her. Anna and I have experienced these kinds of relationships our entire lives. Again, as I said, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life and the most terrifying thing that happened in my life. Because I'll tell you why it's terrifying. Granted, we didn't do it all well when we were younger, and our leaders who were with us did not do it all well when we were with them. But they spoke in their lives and challenged us in a way that my natural family never would have. And if it hadn't have been for that, we would have never got on a plane and moved. Our family had the courage to move to Ukraine. And we would never had the courage to obey God. And so our lives are inextricably tied to people, and they've helped us step into our destiny. Stop it. And so there were people in our lives. I'm just going to give you a litany because I just wanted to push in. Ron Lewis, who was our first pastor. My second pastor, Mike and Mary Beth Williams. Mike and Myra Watkins. Tom and Jean Jackson. Darren and Rebecca Phillips. Taylor and Elizabeth Stewart, who my oldest daughter lives with, their daughter in Raleigh. We have a family in Poland all over Europe that you have no idea, that's bigger than this room right here, that we're so tied to. Shimmick and Magda, Dominika, Deanna Druzgil, Shishik and Najniska, Marcin and Dominika Jutkevich. And then later on, Chris and Renee Gill. And later, surprisingly, I've probably told you a story. When I moved here, Anna said, I just met this couple at Victorious Life Church, and I believe we could be really good friends with them. And I said, I got lots of friends. I don't need any more. And it was Kevin and Sonia Lindsay. And Anna met Sonia, and she goes, you're going to like her husband. And I said, maybe. And and then Kevin immediately invited me out to lunch. I remember the first lunch we ever had. I can't remember. You took me to some sushi restaurant or some fish thing. I can't remember. At any rate, but he told me their story, how they adopted 4 children, and they have one of their natural children, their story and all of that. And in that moment, we got knit to them. And then later on, it was the Bakers, and then Ken Scott, and just more and more, and then surprisingly, I was shocked. I remember about a year into it and getting to know them. In fact, first time we went over to the house for dinner, I was so exhausted. I don't know if you remember. I went into their home and they were preparing dinner. We'd really never spent time together. I just said, I got to lay down on your couch, and I just laid down on their couch and just laid there and talked to them. They were just walking around trying to figure. And Kevin's like, I love that. You feel that comfortable? I go, well, I'm just so exhausted. I just can't do it. Anyway. I believe everybody wants this. I believe everybody wants this kind of joining. Everyone wants to be part of people who has their backs and whose backs their lives. I think we all need this, and we all want that. And if they can just take the risk and get past their wounding. The church is not an organization. It's people. And when we say the church, listen, I've said it, and it's as simple as I can say it. When we have one child, Anna could go, it's your turn, or I go, you get up. But once we had 4 children, we had to organize a little better and make some plans. And when you're just a small group of 2 or 3 people, you may not need to be too organized. But when you're a church of 100 or more, you have to organize. And then you have to make it, how do we make room for other people to come in and be a part of our lives? That's why we structure, and that's called Manna Church High Point. But that's just to help us be the church, to make room for people in our lives and do this. And so what I've learned is you have capacity for an unlimited amount, you do have capacity for these kinds of relationships for the rest of your life. Because just like responsibility, if you have 200 pounds of responsibility on you, you don't pick up all 200 pounds at one time. You go and pick up a dumbbell of 15 pounds and then another one of 20 pounds. And then when you finish with that, you put it down and then you go get another one. And relationships are like that. You don't have to hold all your covenant relationships all at once. Sometimes people move away and that's fine, but you're still in covenant with them. They have your back and you back their lives. And so this is what I'm talking about. God joins people to people. I think everybody wants this. I need to finish. There are two problems. There are two problems that we have to navigate in this. One is the deepest spiritual needs in our hearts cannot be satisfied without deep communion with God through His Son, Jesus Christ. That's a fact. Secondly, most people are looking, but the problem is most people are looking to people to fill the emptiness in them that only God can satisfy. And when they do that, it leads to frustration, resentment, and broken relationships. So this has to be in place. We have to know Him, as the last sermon where I was telling everybody none of you are saved, Anyway. Second problem is that without God, and sometimes with God, we tend to break our relationships through our failure to forgive and our impatience and lack of kindness and self-absorption and our anger. I hate division. I hate divisiveness. I don't mind disagreement. I don't mind fighting. I don't like it. I'm not looking for it. But I hate divisiveness. I hate not having resolve. And I think the world's looking for that. And that's the secret sauce, and it's hard. And it's layered, and it's a lifetime of navigating the greatest joy and the greatest frustrations in the world. Everybody, I believe, everybody wants this. But let me just caveat this, and we'll go to these questions that you can go ahead and bring up, son. I don't think this kind of joining together, people to people, I don't think it's on the level, I'll say it again, it is not on the same level as marriage covenant. Marriage covenant means, basically, not only do you not separate, you don't physically separate. Now, there are times when God does do that in the world, not as much in America, but there are times when God does do that, where He'll separate, and it's on good terms. But joinings like this, you may be joined here for a certain amount of time, and then God may move you like the Duns somewhere else, and that is holy, and God does that often and all the time, really. It's rare that you have a Ray Baker who's been in this church for 30 plus years. That's usually fairly rare. But the Duns came back in this week, and it was joining. We were joined, and it was just, it was the funniest thing. I was sitting back there after the service a Sunday. I was totally unexpected. And Flo came back there with Sydney, who was amazing. And she and Flo put her head on my shoulder and said, "I miss you." It made me so uncomfortable. I thought, she did that because we're joined. There's an intimacy, so no matter where we are. So I'm not talking about, we were told when we were younger, if you leave the church, you're a covenant breaker. I am not talking about that kind of nonsense. But I am talking about, if you're in a church, then be in that group of people fully. And as small group leaders, when we talk about shoulder tapping, and I'm going to stop right here, we're talking about not inviting people just into leadership. We're talking about inviting people into your life and to walk together. So, we're going to take 15 minutes. Kayla is she's our timekeeper. She's going to keep up with 15 minutes. And so just at your table, based on what we just kind of talked about, just answer these questions. You don't have to answer them in order. Maybe you read all three questions and just kind of have your answers all combined in there. But do you feel like you are part of spiritual family now? Why or why not? In your experience, what have been the obstacles to having spiritual family? And how do we develop spiritual family as this group of people move forward? Ready, set, go talk.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this special event, and thank you, Pastor Jeff, for casting this vision on what it means to be spiritual family. We love you so much. Thank you for joining us today, and make sure to check out our second session as well. We'll see you next time.